Every single morning I wake up, I make myself a pot of coffee, and I think to myself, what could go wrong today in Canada? And I think that's my mistake, because Trudeau's track record, or just our political landscape track record so far in the past several months, almost a couple of years, every single day there is something new. And today I've pulled up quite a few things that have just recently occurred, such as Joe Rogan's comments where he endorses Pierre Poilievre on a recent podcast episode, Chrystia Freeland just being absolutely delusional, and this whole Arrive scam app and SNC Lavalin stuff that's happening in committee hearings. Absolute bombshell that happens. Before we get into all of that stuff, I want to encourage everyone to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. We are en route to 400,000 subscribers. And if you don't want to subscribe for me, do it because the government doesn't want you to. And speaking of what the government is lacking in, let's take a quick update look at the polls here. The 338 projections, you have the Conservatives sitting at 210 projections, where they still only need 170 seats. That will never change. The only number that changes on this screen is how much the Conservatives are projected to win. It seems to just be going up and up and up. And when you look down at the odds of winning, 99% across the board for a majority, and just winning the most seats for the Conservatives. So if you're pissed off and fed up with the political landscape here in Canada, you don't have to wait too much longer. You just have to wait till the next federally or scheduled federal election at the end of 2025. And it seems like as long as Pierre avoids any controversies or any big scandals between now and then, things will be good. And it probably helps him a lot that you have people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk that agree with his policies and agree with who he is, or the ideas that he's trying to push and how he's trying to change Canada. But we're going to hold off on the Joe Rogan clip for just right now. Let's take a look at this Chrystia Freeland clip here, where she says that we need to build more homes faster. I'll let you decide how you think, or what you think about this.
Yesterday, there was over a dozen big city mayors in town expressing concern about the signals that they're getting ahead of the budget. As you know, there's a bunch of long-term infrastructure programs put in place almost a decade ago that are now starting to expire. They're very concerned about that. Trudeau had promised.
I just need to pause it here for a quick second. I can't help myself, but there is just something about Chrystia Freeland that her face, I call it, she has a permanent fart-smelling face. That's how her muscles do it. I don't know if that's what she does in her spare time. I'm not really looking into that much more than just these comments, but I don't know what's wrong with this face, folks. Let me know down in the comments. Is this a fart-smelling face if you've ever seen one?
Promised to renew them in the fall. That didn't happen. And so they're saying with all these housing announcements, the government seems to be losing focus on the needs for basic infrastructure to support those houses, and there's no longer the long-term funds that they can tap into to plan their budget. So what is your response to those concerns?
I'll say a couple things, and then I think maybe Sean wants to say a couple things too. So let me start by saying there is no federal government in Canadian history that has invested as ambitiously and as aggressively in infrastructure as our government. It was actually the centerpiece of our 2015 campaign commitment, and we have delivered on that. And I think it's really important for people to understand that that money is actually ramping up in the years ahead.
This, I need to pause it again. This is a horrible thing to brag about. She's bragging that no other government in the history of Canada has ever put this much money into infrastructure, into housing. Yet we're at an all-time high for housing affordability. That's like bragging about being the most wanted criminal. It doesn't make any sense. It's so delusional.
Infrastructure takes a long time to build, and the money is on the books, and there's going to be more and more going forward. So in 23-24, there is $4.3 billion of federal money going into infrastructure across the country. In 24-25, it is nearly $5 billion. That is money already committed. In 25-26, it is more than $7 billion. And so, people just need to understand the money is there. It is out there building things across Canada. And I think we all recognize that when we travel around Canadian cities. Last week I was in Winnipeg, Quebec City, and Toronto, and you just look around and you see infrastructure being built. That is a really good thing. Second, as Sean said, we recognize that housing is the central challenge for Canadians right now. When people talk about affordability, yes, they're talking about prices at the grocery store, and Francois Philippe is doing terrific work there. The single biggest thing in families' budgets is paying your mortgage or paying the rent. And we know that the solution there is we just have to build more faster. We are absolutely committed to that, and we are doing it. You have seen a tremendous rollout of housing, not just projects, but housing measures over the past few months, whether it is living.
Okay, I want to pause it again, and I want to ask you, the viewers, where you live, is there an immense amount of houses that are being built and construction? Because where I live, there is not. All right. There's not a whole lot of construction. There's not a whole lot of new condos being built or houses and developments. There just isn't. I've only really seen a massive amount in one place across all of Canada. And that's usually around Alberta, usually in like Edmonton or the surrounding areas. There are powerhouses, but I just feel like she's lying. She's lying to Canadians. I don't know who she's trying to convince, but I personally have not seen massive construction that could build thousands of homes at once that gets done in an efficient manner. A lot of construction companies actually, or developing companies, they actually go tits up and they go bankrupt because of all the red tape, because they have to wait months and months and months for more permits to get approved by the government. And now the cost of everything, especially lumber, has gone up so much that they just can't afford at their current prices. And that's why the price of houses has gone up, because what used to be a $500,000 or $400,000 single family home now costs that much to make, it seems. So they obviously increase their profit margins, and now that same house is worth $800,000 or $900,000. That's the state of Canada because of fart smelling face right here on screen.
The GST on purpose-built rental, that's 200 to 300,000 new homes. Sean has been zooming around the country doing housing accelerator fund deals. I think we're at 550,000 new homes built that way. Our former rental construction financing initiative, now it's the Apartment Construction Loan Fund, that has been topped up, and that is responsible for hundreds of thousands of homes being built. So we get that. We are working hard to do more and more on housing. And we do recognize that we have to have conversations around being sure that there is infrastructure to support that housing.
What a bunch of malarkey as well. I mean, bragging about jet setting around the country into different parts of the world to have these discussions about house building and construction. I mean, that could be done through Zoom. They're not using electric planes to get there. She's not riding a bicycle, or else how did she get a speeding ticket for going 150 or 130 last year in Alberta on her pedal bike? No, come on. It's just not happening. So I don't understand the hypocrisy of all these different things. Everyone else has to cut back on their fossil fuel emissions, except for us. While we bankrupt Canadians, and while we take all of your money from the taxpayers' pool and we waste it on caviar, we're also going to waste even more money on getting there to those destinations. It's just very hypocritical, and it's pissed off a lot of people. And speaking of pissed off a lot of people, let's take a look at this new bill that the Liberals are imposing, this online harm bill, and then we're going to get into the Joe Rogan clip here in a moment.
Internet safety is a subject talked about in most households, especially with vulnerable family members, young kids or seniors. The Liberal government is hoping its long-promised online harms bill will help protect people. The latest version is set to be introduced tomorrow. CTV's Colton Parale reports.
Something needs to be done and to make it easier.
The Liberals' long-awaited online harms bill will be introduced Monday, the latest in a series of sweeping and controversial internet regulations.
We need to make sure, and I think we can all agree, we need to protect our kids online.
The proposed bill is aimed at online companies and expected to target hate speech, terrorist content, child exploitation, and the sharing of non-consensual images.
Okay, so this is where it becomes very controversial, because when you look at some of these laws, it kind of makes sense, but when you actually look into the bill, it's so broad. So hate speech. Who defines what hate speech is? What is the term for, or what is the definition of hate speech? And how can the government that's implementing this add on to that definition to fit their bill? Keep in mind, we are coming up into an election. So is criticizing the government going to be considered hate speech? I'm willing to bet it is, which is very concerning. Now, the second one, the T word content. Okay, well, obviously, that's something to be taken very seriously. Anyone who loves their own country or is a good person is against that T word. I absolutely agree with that. But again, what is that definition? They called a bunch of people that were protesting at the Freedom Convoy a couple years ago back in Ottawa in 2022 the T word, right? Called them a bunch of mean names. So would that be then hate speech? Right. So I just don't understand. This is where it gets very, very disingenuous. And the child exploitation. Yeah, of course, man. You got to protect the kids. A lot of people are going to obviously agree with that. And sharing non-consensual images. Yeah, of course. A lot of people agree with that. But where does it end? Right. What about Justin Trudeau having a meltdown? Right. And then his image gets shared. And does he consent to that? And it goes viral? Or what about his wife is out with her boyfriend and Justin Trudeau's holding the camera like a little cuck, right? Like, where does that end? Is that now hate speech? Is that now sharing non-consensual images? I understand what they're trying to say with the non-consensual images. It's called revenge porn. Absolutely, that's something that's like very frowned upon and it should be taken seriously. But the actual structure of these bills, they're so broad, and that's what's so scary. And that's why you have people like Joe Rogan that are saying, hey man, there's something very much wrong with this. Let's take a look at this clip here. This is with a recent episode with a Canadian comedian, Tom Green.
He did legalize weed. That is one thing that he did do. So
congratulations. He did one good thing. It's just he's a weasel. That's the problem. He's what I don't like in leaders. This fake nonsensical gaslighting. It drives me nuts. It's so creepy. And then using all the inclusive terms to make it seem like everybody else is and you're an amazing human being and you're on the right side of progressive movement. And like, it's all just a act to stay in power. Yeah. And when you see politicians do it, you know, they wet their finger and try to figure out which way the wind's blowing and say those things and then act in the interests of whatever money got them into that position in the first place. Yeah. Whatever machine is behind them, whatever support they get. That's all they're doing. And those types of politicians, that's not the only kind you can have.
And then he proceeds to talk about how Pierre Poilievre is a different kind of politician, and that's what Canada should be gearing towards. And that speaks volume, because Joe Rogan is obviously the biggest podcaster in the world. Everyone, or the majority of people, gravitate to him, and then his clips get millions of views on top of the original podcast. And it's very interesting, and I think it only benefits the future of the political landscape. But again, is this going to be against the Liberals' online hate speech act as foreign political influence? Because Joe Rogan is obviously a very influential individual. He doesn't have skin in the game in Canada. He does come to visit Canada, right, for hunting, fishing, with all that crazy stuff that he does, that fun stuff that he does, that very anti-liberal things that he does. But is it going to be considered some form of hate speech or foreign political influence under the new Liberals' policies and online hate speech acts and things like that? That's what's very concerning about the state of Canada right now. And speaking of concerning, you have Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons here that says that people in Canada are dumpster diving to find food. I can't believe this is happening. This is something I've heard of in the past as someone who's lived in a van for about 4 years, right? Like pure 100% van life, not in a mom's driveway, not in an RV park, but living on the van, on the road, parking out on the street and stuff like that. I've actually met other people that lived in their van that were dumpster diving, but I thought that's where it ended. I didn't realize people that don't live in their van also dumpster dive. So let's take a look at this House of Commons clip here of Pierre Poilievre just obliterating the current state of Canada.
Years this Prime Minister is not worth the cost of food. Today we got a terrible report from the charity Second Harvest, which reports that this year they expect 1 million additional visits to food banks and that last year 36% of charities had to turn people away because they were running out of resources. Will the Prime Minister reverse his inflationary carbon tax on farmers and food?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to fight for Canadians, we will take no lessons from these conservatives, Mr. Speaker. Today, I just appeared in front of the Agricultural Committee, and Mr. Speaker, it was shocking to see that one of their members was defending the profit margin of foreign food processor, Mr. Speaker, at a time when we should all be fighting in this House for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. If the leader of the opposition want to do something for Canadians, vote for C-59, increase competition in this country. More competition is more choice, better price for Canadians, and more innovation, Mr. Speaker. Canadians understand that. Will he understand?
We call that man the little chihuahua.
The opposition.
Speaker, what I understand is that after 8 years, this Prime Minister, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, is not worth the cost of food. And if you thought that grocery profits were too high, after 8 years, you'd think he might have done something about it. But instead, we now have a massive increase. Let's get this straight. Second Harvest predicts there will be 1 million more visits to food banks this year than there was in last year's record-breaking year. In fact, many charities can no longer give people food because they've actually run out. In light of the failure of the carbon tax and the pain it is causing, will they axe the tax so that Canadians can afford to eat?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
One thing Canadians know, Mr. Speaker, is that the leader of opposition, the preferred verb is cut, Mr. Speaker. We all know he would be cutting. When you're looking at the record on both sides, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what we have done in the last few months to fight for Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We have launched the largest reform on competition in this nation history. We have made sure that we have a functioning Consumers Bureau of Affairs, Mr. Speaker. We have made sure that we have now in this country more measures to fight for Canadians. Mr. Speaker, every member of this House should be fighting for Canadians. The question is, will the Conservative fight with us for Canadians?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after that answer just proves that after 8 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the cost. It's not just that 1 million more people will visit food banks this year than in last year's record-smashing year. It's that now there's a large Facebook group of 800 people, 8,000 people, who call themselves the Dumpster Diving Network. So desperate are they that not only can they not afford groceries or find it at food banks, that they're literally jumping into garbage cans to find food. How desperate do Canadians have to get before this government will finally axe its tax on food?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 8 years, I have watched time and time again the Conservatives stand up to vote against the very measures that are putting money in the pockets of families to help them cover the cost of food. When it comes to the Canada Child Benefit, we stopped sending checks to millionaires so we could put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 families. When it comes to taxes, we raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% to cut them for the middle class. When it comes to seniors, we put more money in the pockets of low-income single seniors. On every one of these measures, the Conservatives have opposed them. We will continue to do what's necessary to allow families to put food on the table, no matter how hard they oppose.
Yeah, that guy right there, he lost 1 million people when he was the immigration minister. So I wouldn't take what he says with anything more than a grain of salt. But that's where we're going to end today's video, folks. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments about Freeland, about Joe Rogan's comments, or about even the dumpster diving community. Do you know someone that's part of it? Are you a part of it? Do you agree with it? Do you think it's disgusting? I'd love to know what you guys think down below. Thanks for watching, folks. On our way out, I'd really like to encourage you guys to smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. It does really help grow the channel, as well as I hope you consider turning post notifications on so you can actually be notified of upcoming videos. YouTube has this weird thing where they like to unsubscribe people manually or automatically from people's channels, and so you just got to be careful and just check every now and then to see if you're actually still subscribed. You may have done it once, but they may have unsubscribed you for their own personal reasons. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.